A dying gunslinger wakes in a stranger's cabin, saved by a woman who should have left him to rot. But when a mining empire decides her land is worth killing for, the deadliest man in Arizona will have to choose between the violence that made him and the future he never thought he'd deserve. If you want to know whether love can survive bullets and greed on the 1873 frontier, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Coulter Hayes had been shot before. Twice in the chest outside Tucson, once through the shoulder in a rail yard dispute that got uglier than anyone planned. A graze along his ribs in El Paso that left a scar he could still trace with his thumb when the nights got cold. But this was different. This felt like dying. He lay face down beside a muddy creek somewhere in the southern Arizona territory, blood soaking through his shirt, his vision blurring in and out like someone kept pulling a curtain across his eyes. The ambush had come fast. 3 men. Maybe 4. He'd dropped 2 before the third put a bullet through his side, just below the ribs, angled bad. He'd crawled maybe 100 yards before his legs quit. Then his arms, then everything. The sky above him was too blue. He hated that. If a man was going to die, the sky ought to have the decency to look sad about it. His breathing came shallow now, ragged and wet. He didn't know if the wetness was sweat or blood or both. Didn't much matter. The creek burbled beside him, indifferent. A hawk circled overhead, probably already sizing him up for a meal. Coulter tried to laugh at that, but it came out as a cough, and the cough brought pain so sharp he thought the world might split in half. He closed his eyes. So this is it, he thought. Middle of nowhere, no one to know, no one to care. That was fine. He'd lived the kind of life that didn't earn mourners. Then he heard footsteps. Boots. Moving slow. Cautious. He forced his eyes open, squinting against the sun, but all he could make out was a shape. Tall. Lean. A wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face he couldn't see. "You dead?" a voice asked. It was a woman's voice, low, steady, suspicious. Coulter tried to answer, but all that came out was a groan. "That's not an answer," she said. He felt the toe of a boot nudge his shoulder, not hard, just testing. Then hands, strong hands, rolled him onto his back, and the pain that shot through him was so immense he nearly blacked out right there. "Christ," the woman muttered, "you're a mess." He blinked up at her. She was somewhere in her late 20s, maybe 30. Sun-darkened skin, brown hair pulled back in a loose braid, sharp eyes that didn't look scared or sympathetic, just calculating. She knelt beside him, tugged his shirt open, and examined the wound without flinching. "This is bad," she said flatly. "Noticed," Coulter rasped. "You got a name?" "Coulter Hayes." Her expression didn't change. If the name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. In some towns, that name got you a wide berth. In others, it got you a knife in the back. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, it apparently got you nothing. "I'm Evelyn Mercer," she said. "This is my land. You're bleeding all over it." "Sorry." "Don't apologize, just don't die yet. I'm deciding whether to help you or let the buzzards have you." He coughed again, tasted copper. "What's the holdup?" She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You don't look like you're worth saving, but I also don't feel like dragging a corpse off my property." "Practical." "I am." She stood, glanced back toward a line of cottonwoods maybe a quarter-mile off. "My cabin's not far. Can you ride?" Coulter looked at her like she'd asked if he could fly. "Stupid question," she said. "All right, don't move." Wasn't planning on it. She disappeared for a few minutes, and Coulter lay there trying not to think about how much blood he had already lost. When she came back, she had a horse, a sturdy bay mare, and a travois rigged behind it. She crouched beside him again, worked her hands under his shoulders, and hauled him up with a grunt. "You're heavier than you look," she said. "Muscle, or stupidity." She dragged him onto the travois, and every movement felt like someone was driving nails into his ribs. He must have made a sound because she paused. "You want me to stop?" "No." "Good, because I wasn't going to." She tied him down with rope so he wouldn't roll off, then climbed onto the mare and started riding. The travois jolted over rocks and roots, and Coulter clenched his teeth so hard he thought they might crack. The world tilted, the sky swam. At some point, he passed out. Bisipak. When he woke, he was inside. The air smelled like wood smoke and something herbal, sage maybe, or juniper. He was lying on a cot, stripped down to his trousers, a thick bandage wrapped tight around his torso. The wound burned, but the bleeding had stopped. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Don't," Evelyn said from across the room. She was standing at a table near the fireplace, grinding something in a mortar. She didn't look over at him. "You tear those stitches. I'm not sewing you back up. You can bleed out on your own time." Coulter eased himself back down. "Where am I?" "My cabin, about 6 miles south of Red Bluff Creek. You've been out for 2 days." "2 days?" "Fever hit you hard. You were talking nonsense half the time. Lot of names, lot of apologies." He grimaced. "Sorry." "I said you were talking nonsense. I didn't say I listened." She brought over a tin cup filled with something that smelled foul. "Drink this." "What is it?" "Willow bark tea. It'll help with the pain." He took the cup, sniffed it, made a face. "Smells like dirt." "You want the pain or the tea?" He drank. It tasted worse than it smelled, but the bitterness was a welcome distraction from the ache in his side. When he finished, she took the cup back and set it on the table. "You're lucky," she said. "Bullet went clean through. Didn't hit anything vital, but you lost a lot of blood. You'll need rest. Weeks, probably." Coulter looked around the cabin. It was small, one room, maybe 20 feet across, a stone fireplace, a single narrow window, a table, 2 chairs, a shelf lined with jars and bottles. Everything neat, everything purposeful. No clutter, no decoration. "You live here alone?" he asked. "I do." "Why?" She gave him a long look, the kind that said she was deciding whether the question was worth answering. "Because it's mine," she said finally, "and I don't need anyone's permission to be here." Coulter nodded. He understood that. He'd spent most of his life avoiding the same kind of entanglements. "You got family?" "Had a brother. He died 3 years ago. Pneumonia." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She turned back to the table, started grinding again. "But sorry doesn't build fences or brand cattle or keep the roof from leaking, so I do it myself." "That why you saved me? Need extra hands?" She paused, then looked at him over her shoulder. "I saved you because leaving a man to die felt wrong. Don't make me regret it." "I won't." "We'll see." The first week was hell. Coulter could barely move without tearing something loose. Evelyn changed his bandages twice a day, her hands efficient and unsympathetic. She didn't coddle him, didn't offer comfort, but she kept him alive, and that was more than most people had ever done. She worked from sunup to sundown, feeding chickens, mending fences, hauling water from the creek. He watched her through the window, irritated that he couldn't help, irritated that she didn't seem to need it. "You always this stubborn?" he asked one evening as she came in covered in dust. "You always this useless?" she shot back. He laughed, then winced. "Fair." She poured herself a cup of water from a clay pitcher, drank it in one long pull. "You heal fast. You can make yourself useful. Until then, stay out of my way." "Yes, ma'am." He frowned. "Don't call me ma'am. I'm not old." "What should I call you?" "Evelyn, or nothing. I don't care." By the second week, he could sit up without feeling like his insides were going to spill out. By the third, he could walk to the door and back. Evelyn watched him like a hawk, waiting for him to collapse. But he didn't. He was too stubborn for that. One morning, he found her struggling to lift a beam back onto the porch roof, where it had come loose during a windstorm. He walked over, grabbed the other end, and lifted. She stared at him. "You're supposed to be resting." "I'm rested." "You're an idiot." Also true. Together they wrestled the beam back into place and nailed it down. When they finished, Evelyn wiped sweat from her forehead and gave him a look that might have been approval, or annoyance, hard to tell. "You know how to swing a hammer," she said. "I know how to do a lot of things." "Like get shot?" "That too." She almost smiled. Almost. It. By the fourth week, Coulter was working. Not full days, his side still ached if he pushed too hard, but enough to feel useful. He repaired the chicken coop, fixed a broken gate, helped Evelyn herd her small bunch of cattle down to better grazing near the creek. She didn't talk much, but when she did, he listened. She told him about the homestead, how her brother had filed the claim 5 years ago, how they'd built the cabin together, how she'd stayed after he died because leaving felt like giving up. "People in town thought I'd fold," she said one evening as they sat outside watching the sun sink behind the hills. "Thought I'd sell the land and move back east. Get married. Be respectable." "Why didn't you?" She looked at him like he'd asked why the sky was blue. "Because this is mine. I worked for it. Bled for it. I'm not handing it over just because some men think a woman can't manage alone." Coulter nodded. "You're managing fine." "I know I am." They sat in silence for a while. The desert stretched out around them, vast and empty and indifferent. Coulter had spent most of his life moving through places like this, never staying long enough to care. But sitting here, next to this woman who'd saved him for no reason other than it was the right thing to do, he felt something unfamiliar. He felt like he wanted to stay. It was late September when the first man came. Coulter was out mending a section of fence when he saw the rider approaching from the north. A squat, heavy man on a gray horse, dressed in a dark suit that looked out of place in the desert. Evelyn was inside the cabin, but she must have heard the hoofbeats because she stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. The man reined up a respectful distance away, removed his hat, and plastered on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Mercer," he said. "Afternoon." "Mr. Dalton," Evelyn replied coolly. "What do you want?" Dalton glanced at Coulter, then back at Evelyn. "Just wanted to check in, see how you're getting along out here." "I'm fine." "Good. That's good." He shifted in the saddle. "I also wanted to extend another offer. The Blackstone Mining Company is still very interested in purchasing your land. We're prepared to offer a fair price. More than fair, actually. I told you last time, I'm not selling." "Miss Mercer, I understand your attachment to this place, but you have to be practical. A woman alone out here, it's dangerous. Wouldn't you feel safer with a little money in the bank? Maybe a nice house in town?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I said no." Dalton's smile faded. "The company's going to develop this region whether you cooperate or not. It'd be a shame if you ended up on the wrong side of progress." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice." Coulter walked over slowly, deliberately, his hand resting on the grip of the revolver he'd taken to wearing again. Dalton's eyes flicked to him, and something uneasy crossed his face. "Who's this?" Dalton asked. "A friend," Evelyn said. "Didn't know you had friends." "Now you do." Dalton stared at Coulter for a long moment, then put his hat back on. "Think about the offer, Miss Mercer. It won't stay on the table forever." He turned his horse and rode off, kicking up dust as he went. When he was gone, Evelyn lowered the rifle and let out a slow breath. "That happen a lot?" Coulter asked. "Third time this month." "What's Blackstone Mining?" "Company out of Denver. They're buying up land all over the territory. Found silver deposits north of here, and they think there's more underground. They've been pressuring homesteaders to sell. Some have, some haven't. And you're one of the ones who hasn't." "That's right." Coulter looked off in the direction Dalton had ridden. "He'll be back." "I know. And next time he might bring more than a smile." Evelyn met his eyes. "I know that too. Per sec." That night they sat by the fire, neither of them saying much. Finally, Coulter broke the silence. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Every day?" "But you don't." She stared into the flames. "No, I don't." "Why not?" She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "Because if I leave, they win, and I'm tired of men like Dalton winning." Coulter nodded. He understood that too. "You going to stay?" she asked. He looked at her. "You want me to?" "I'm asking if you're going to." "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." She didn't smile, didn't thank him, just nodded once, like that was the answer she'd expected. But when she stood to go to bed, she paused at the door and looked back. "Coulter?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you didn't die." And then she was gone. October came in dry and hot. The cattle grazed listlessly in what little grass remained. Evelyn spent her days hauling water, and Coulter spent his repairing equipment and keeping watch. He didn't see Dalton again, but he saw other riders, men in dark clothes, watching from the hills, always just far enough away that confrontation wasn't an option. Evelyn noticed them too. "They're sizing us up," she said one morning. "Probably." "You worried?" Coulter checked the cylinder of his revolver, then slid it back into the holster. "Not yet." But he was lying, and they both knew it. One afternoon, a neighbor rode over, a wiry old man named Hewitt, who ran a small ranch about 10 miles east. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and gray. "They burned me out," he said without preamble. Evelyn's face went pale. "What?" "2 nights ago. Barn went up in flames, lost half my stock. My boy tried to stop them, and they beat him so bad he can't see out of his left eye." "Did you go to the marshal?" Hewitt laughed bitterly. "Marshal's on Blackstone's payroll. He told me it was probably drifters. Told me to be more careful." Evelyn clenched her fists. "This is insane." "It's business," Hewitt said, "and we're in the way." He looked at Coulter. "You got a gun, son?" "I do." "You know how to use it?" "I do." Hewitt nodded grimly. "Good, because they're coming for all of us. It's just a matter of time." That night, Coulter couldn't sleep. He lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. Evelyn was asleep on the other side of the cabin, her breathing slow and even. She looked small in the firelight, vulnerable in a way she never allowed herself to be during the day. He thought about Dalton, about the riders on the hills, about Hewitt's burned barn and his boy's ruined eye. He thought about all the violence he'd done in his life, the men he'd killed, the towns he'd left behind, the blood he'd spilled for money or pride, or just because someone had asked. And for the first time, he thought about using that violence for something that mattered. He didn't want to drift anymore. He wanted to fight. Not for himself, for her. The first frost came early that year, dusting the desert in silver before dawn. Coulter woke to the sound of Evelyn already moving around the cabin, stoking the fire, boiling coffee. He sat up slowly, testing his side. The wound had healed into a thick ridge of scar tissue that pulled when he moved too fast, but the pain was manageable now, mostly. "You're up early," he said. He bought. "Cattle need moving," she replied without turning around. "Weather's turning. They'll need access to the southern pasture before the ground freezes." "I'll help." "You sure you're ready?" "I'm ready." She poured 2 cups of coffee, handed him one. "Then eat something first. It's going to be a long day." They worked through the morning, driving the small herd south toward better grazing. The cattle were stubborn, scattering every time they got close to moving them through the narrow canyon pass. Coulter's side ached by midday, but he didn't complain. Evelyn didn't either, though he could see the exhaustion in the way she sat her horse, shoulders tight, jaw set. By the time they got the herd settled, the sun was already sinking low. They rode back in silence. The desert stretched out around them in shades of orange and purple. Coulter glanced over at Evelyn, her face shadowed beneath her hat, and wondered how long she'd been doing this alone. How many days like this she'd survived without anyone to share the load. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Regret what?" "Staying." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. "Every time something breaks, every time the well runs low, every time some man rides up here and tells me I'd be better off somewhere else." She paused. "But regret doesn't change anything, so I keep going." Coulter nodded. He understood that. He'd spent most of his life running from regret, and it hadn't done him any good either. When they got back to the cabin, there was a rider waiting. Not Dalton this time. A younger man, maybe 25, lean and nervous looking. He sat his horse like he wasn't sure whether to stay or bolt. When he saw them approach, he straightened up, trying to look braver than he felt. "Miss Mercer," he said. Evelyn reined up, her hand already moving toward the rifle strapped to her saddle. "Who are you?" "Name's Peter Langley. I work for Blackstone Mining, clerk in the Denver office." He swallowed hard, glanced at Coulter. "I need to talk to you, both of you. If you're here to make another offer, I'm not." He dismounted, pulled a leather satchel from his saddlebag. "I'm here to warn you." Evelyn and Coulter exchanged a look. She dismounted slowly, keeping her distance. "Warn us about what?" Langley opened the satchel, pulled out a stack of papers. His hands were shaking. "About what Blackstone's planning. About what they've already done. Coulter stepped closer. You better start making sense, kid. I've been working for them for 2 years, Langley said quickly, keeping records, filing claims. I didn't ask questions. I just did my job. He held out the papers. But then I started noticing things. Payments to judges, bribes to land surveyors, orders to hired men, enforcers they call them, men with guns. Evelyn took the papers, started reading. Her face went pale. What is this? She asked. Proof, Langley said. Proof that Blackstone's been running homesteaders off their land illegally, burning them out, threatening them, paying off officials to look the other way. He pointed to one of the documents. That's an order for your property. They've already hired men to deal with you. Coulter felt something cold settle in his chest. Deal with her how? Langley looked at him, fear plain in his eyes. However they have to. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She flipped through the papers, her hand steady, even though Coulter could see the fury building behind her eyes. Why are you bringing this to me? Because it's wrong, Langley said, and because I can't keep pretending I don't see it. He took a shaky breath. I copied everything I could find. Names, dates, orders. If you can get this to the territorial authorities, they'll have to investigate. They'll have to shut Blackstone down. Or they'll bury it, Coulter said flatly. If Blackstone's paying off judges, what makes you think anyone else will care? I don't know if they will, Langley admitted, but I know if no one tries, Blackstone wins. And I'm tired of watching them win. Evelyn looked at Coulter, then back at Langley. You realize what you've done? If they find out you took these, they'll kill me. I know. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I quit yesterday, packed my things, and left Denver before anyone noticed the files were missing. I've been writing for 3 days straight. He wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold. I'm not going back. Evelyn folded the papers carefully, slid them back into the satchel. You did the right thing. Doesn't feel like it. It never does. She handed the satchel to Coulter. Keep this safe. Coulter took it, nodded. Langley looked relieved, like he'd been carrying a weight so heavy it had nearly crushed him, and now someone else was holding it. There's one more thing, Langley said. Victor Harrow, he owns Blackstone. He's planning to come out here himself. He doesn't like loose ends, and you're a loose end, Miss Mercer. He'll make an example out of you. When? Coulter asked. I don't know. But soon. Evelyn stepped forward, offered her hand. Langley shook it, surprised. Thank you, she said. For this. For all of it. I hope it helps. It will. Langley climbed back onto his horse, hesitated. Be careful. These men, they're not like regular hired guns. They're professionals. They don't make mistakes. Neither do I, Coulter said. Langley rode off into the gathering dusk, and Evelyn stood there watching him go, her arms crossed against the cold. You believe him? She asked. Yeah, Coulter said. I do. Then we've got a problem. We've had a problem. Now we've got proof. She looked at him. Proof doesn't stop bullets. No, but it gives us something to fight with besides just guns. They went inside. Coulter spread the documents out on the table while Evelyn lit the lamps. There were contracts, invoices, letters signed by men whose names Coulter didn't recognize, but whose positions he did, county clerks, land commissioners, even a territorial judge. Blackstone had bought half the government, or at least the parts that mattered. This is bad, Evelyn said quietly. Yeah. If we try to use this, they'll come after us harder. Probably. She sat down, rubbed her face with both hands. And if we don't, they'll come after us anyway. Coulter leaned back against the table, arms crossed. So, what do you want to do? Evelyn looked up at him, exhaustion and determination warring in her eyes. I want to fight. Good, Coulter said, because so do I. The next morning, Evelyn rode into Red Bluff to send a telegram to the territorial marshal's office in Prescott. Coulter stayed behind, keeping watch. He didn't like her going alone, but she'd insisted. If both of us leave, they'll know something's wrong, she'd said. And I'm not giving them an excuse to burn this place down while we're gone. She came back just before noon, her face grim. Well? Coulter asked. Marshal's office received the message. They said they'd look into it. That's it? That's it. She dismounted, tied her horse. I also stopped by the Hewitt's place. Told them what Langley brought us. They're scared, but they're willing to fight if it comes to that. What about the others? The other homesteaders? I'll ride out tomorrow. Talk to as many as I can. She paused. If we're going to survive this, we can't do it alone. We need everyone. Coulter nodded. It made sense, but it also meant more people in danger, more lives on the line. He'd spent most of his life keeping his problems to himself, and now he was part of something bigger than that. It felt strange, heavy. Evelyn must have seen something in his face because she stepped closer. You don't have to stay, you know. You don't owe me anything. I know. Then why are you still here? He met her eyes. Because I want to be. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. All right. That night they ate in silence. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Coulter kept thinking about what Langley had said. Victor Harrow's planning to come out here himself. Men like Harrow didn't leave their fancy offices unless something was personal. And if it was personal, it meant things were about to get worse. You ever kill a man? Evelyn asked suddenly. Coulter looked at her. She was staring into the fire, her expression unreadable. Yeah, he said. How many? More than I should have. She nodded slowly. You regret it? Some of them. Which ones? He thought about that. The ones who didn't deserve it? And the ones who did? No. She was quiet for a while. Then, if it comes down to it, if they come here and we have to fight, can you do it again? Coulter didn't hesitate. Yes. Even if it means killing men who are just doing a job? They stop being just men doing a job the moment they point a gun at you. Evelyn looked at him, something shifting in her expression. Not fear, not judgment, just understanding. Good, she said, because I'm not letting them take this place, not without a fight. Neither am I. Woke up. Over the next week, Evelyn rode out to every homestead within 20 miles. She came back each night exhausted, covered in dust, but determined. Some of the settlers were willing to stand together, others weren't. One family had already packed up and left, too scared to stay. I can't blame them, Evelyn said one evening. They've got kids, they've got more to lose. And you don't? She looked at him. I've got this land, and I've got you. That's more than I had a month ago. Coulter didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. But something warm and uncomfortable settled in his chest, and he didn't try to push it away. By the end of the week, Evelyn had gathered commitments from 5 families. It wasn't much, but it was something. They agreed to meet at Hewitt's ranch the following Sunday to plan their next move. You think 5 families is enough? Coulter asked. It has to be. Sunday came cold and overcast. They rode out early, the sky the color of old iron. Hewitt's ranch was small but well kept, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and stubborn pride. When they arrived, the other families were already there, 8 adults and a handful of children who played in the dirt while the adults talked. Hewitt greeted them at the door, his face still bruised from the beating he'd taken. His son stood beside him, one eye swollen shut, but he nodded at Coulter like they were brothers and something neither of them had asked for. Glad you could make it, Hewitt said. Wouldn't miss it, Evelyn replied. Inside, they gathered around a long wooden table. Evelyn laid out the documents Langley had brought, and the others crowded around, reading in silence. When they finished, the room was heavy with anger and fear. This is proof, said a man named Carson, who ran a cattle operation to the west. We take this to the authorities. They'll have to act. We already did, Evelyn said. Sent a telegram to Prescott. Marshal's office said they'd investigate. And you believe them? No, but it buys us time. A woman named Ruth, thin and sharp-eyed, leaned forward. Time for what? To sit here and wait for them to burn us out one by one? No, Evelyn said firmly. Time to organize. Time to make sure that if they come, we're ready. Ready how? Carson asked. We're farmers, ranchers. We're not gunslingers. Coulter spoke up. You don't have to be. You just have to be willing to stand your ground. Carson looked at him skeptically. And who are you? Someone who knows how to fight. That's supposed to make us feel better? It's supposed to keep you alive. The room went quiet. Finally, Hewitt cleared his throat. Coulter's right. We can't just roll over. We've put too much into this land. Our families have bled for it. If we let Blackstone take it without a fight, what was it all for? Ruth nodded slowly. So what do we do? Evelyn straightened. We watch each other's backs. We set up a rotation. Someone's always on watch. If anyone sees Blackstone's men, they send word immediately. We don't face them alone. We face them together. And if they come in force? Carson asked. Then we fight in force, Coulter said. But we do it smart. We use the land. We make them come to us on our terms, not theirs. One by one, the settlers nodded. It wasn't confidence exactly, but it was resolve. They spent the rest of the afternoon working out the details. Who would patrol which sections? How to send signals if trouble came? Where to gather if things went bad? By the time they finished, the sun was setting and the children were getting restless. As they prepared to leave, Hewitt pulled Coulter aside. You think we can win this? He asked quietly. Coulter looked at him. Honestly, I don't know, but I know you'll lose if you don't try. Hewitt nodded grimly. That's what I figured. 3 days later, the trouble started. Coulter was out checking the fence line when he saw the smoke, black and thick, rising from somewhere to the east. His gut tightened. He spurred his horse and rode hard toward it. It was Carson's place. The barn was already gone, collapsed into a pile of burning timber. The house was still standing, but barely. Flames licked at the roof, and Carson and his wife were frantically hauling buckets of water from the well, trying to save what they could. Coulter dismounted, grabbed a bucket, started helping. By the time they got the fire under control, the barn was nothing but ash, and the house was blackened and ruined. Carson stood there staring at the wreckage, his face blank with shock. They came at night, his wife said, her voice shaking. 4 of them. They told us to leave. When we wouldn't, they torched the barn. Said the house would be next if we didn't clear out by the end of the week. Coulter clenched his fists. You see their faces? No, they wore bandanas. Did they hurt you? No, but they made it clear they would if we stayed. Carson finally spoke, his voice hollow. We're done. We can't fight this. Yes, you can, Coulter said. With what? We just lost everything. You lost a barn. You've still got land. You've still got each other. Coulter put a hand on his shoulder. You leave now, they win, and then they'll do this to the next family and the next, until none of us are left. Carson looked at him, tears streaking through the soot on his face. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are, Coulter said. And you're not alone. Carson's wife stepped forward, took her husband's hand. He's right. We don't run. Not now. Carson closed his eyes, nodded slowly. All right. Coulter helped them salvage what they could, then rode back to Evelyn's place. She was waiting on the porch, rifle across her lap. I saw the smoke, she said. Carson's barn. They're fine, but barely. Her jaw tightened. It's starting. Yeah. Then we need to be ready. That night, they didn't sleep much. They took turns keeping watch, listening for hoofbeats, for voices, for anything that didn't belong. The desert was silent except for the wind, but the silence felt wrong, dangerous. Morning came gray and cold. Coulter was checking the horses when he heard riders approaching, 3 of them, moving slow and deliberate. He grabbed his rifle, stepped out into the open. Evelyn came out behind him, her own rifle ready. The riders stopped about 50 yards out. The man in the center was older, well-dressed, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that looked like they'd been calculating odds since birth. Miss Mercer, the man called out. My name is Victor Harrow. I believe we have some business to discuss. Evelyn didn't lower her rifle. I've got nothing to say to you. Harrow smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I think you do. May I approach? You can talk from there. Harrow sighed, dismounted anyway. The 2 men with him stayed on their horses, hands resting on the guns at their hips. Harrow walked forward slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. When he was 20 feet away, Coulter raised his rifle. That's close enough, Coulter said. Harrow stopped, looked at him with mild interest. And who might you be? Someone who doesn't like your company. Fair enough. Harrow turned his attention back to Evelyn. Miss Mercer, I'm going to be direct. I want your land. I'm willing to pay you $10,000 for it. That's more than it's worth, and we both know it. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price. Not this. Harrow's smile faded. You're being unreasonable. I'm being clear. Now get off my property. Harrow studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Coulter. You know who I am? Yeah, Coulter said. A man who thinks money makes him untouchable. Money makes me practical. It allows me to solve problems efficiently. He looked back at Evelyn. You're a problem, Miss Mercer, but you don't have to be. Take the money. Move on. Live a comfortable life somewhere else. And if I don't? Harrow's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then I'll solve the problem another way. Evelyn raised her rifle, sighted down the barrel. You threatening me? I'm offering you a choice. There's a difference. Doesn't sound like it. Harrow sighed, turned, and walked back to his horse. He mounted smoothly, adjusted his hat. You've got 1 week to reconsider. After that, I can't guarantee your safety. I don't need your guarantees. Harrow looked at her one last time, something almost like regret crossing his face. You're a brave woman, Miss Mercer, but bravery doesn't stop bullets. He spurred his horse and rode off, his men following. When they were gone, Evelyn lowered her rifle, her hands shaking. You all right? Coulter asked. No, she said, but I will be. She turned and walked back into the cabin, and Coulter stood there watching the dust settle where Harrow had been. 1 week. They had 1 week. Coulter spent the next 2 days preparing. He cleaned every gun they had, checked every round of ammunition, made sure the knives were sharp and the rifle sights were true. Evelyn worked alongside him, grim and focused. On the 3rd day, Hewitt rode over with his son and 2 other men from the homesteaders group. They brought extra ammunition, a couple of shotguns, and a determination that looked fragile but real. We're not letting them take you down alone, Hewitt said. Evelyn looked at them, something like gratitude flickering across her face. Thank you. Don't thank us yet, Hewitt replied. We might all be dead by the end of the week. Then we'll die standing, Coulter said. Hewitt grinned, though there was no humor in it. Damn right. They spent the day reinforcing the cabin, building makeshift barricades, planning fields of fire. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't professional, but it was something. That night, as they sat around the fire, Evelyn spoke quietly. You ever think about what happens after? She asked. After what? Coulter said. After all this. If we survive. He looked at her. You mean if Blackstone backs down? Or if we beat them? If we actually win? Coulter was quiet for a moment. He hadn't let himself think that far ahead. Thinking past the next fight felt like tempting fate. But sitting here, in this cabin that smelled like wood smoke and coffee, with this woman who'd saved his life for no reason except it was right, he let himself imagine it. I think, he said slowly, that I'd like to stay. Help you build this place into something that lasts. Evelyn looked at him, surprise and something else, something softer, crossing her face. You mean that? Yeah, I do. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she reached over and squeezed his hand once, briefly, before pulling back. Good, she said. Because I'd like that too. The fire crackled between them, and for a moment the weight of what was coming didn't feel quite so heavy. But the moment didn't last, because the next night, just after midnight, the barn exploded into flames. Coulter was already moving before the sound fully registered. He rolled off the cot, grabbed his rifle, and kicked open the door. The night air hit him cold and sharp, but all he felt was the heat pouring off the burning barn 50 yards away. Flames climbed the walls, spreading fast, feeding on dry wood and old hay. Evelyn was right behind him, boots barely laced, hair loose around her shoulders. She stopped on the porch, staring at the fire, her face lit orange. They're here, she said. I know. Coulter scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, looking for movement, for shapes, for anything. The horses were screaming in the corral, panicked by the flames. He ran toward them, threw open the gate, let them scatter into the night. Better loose than burned alive. A gunshot cracked from somewhere in the dark. The bullet hit the fence post beside Coulter's head, splintering wood. He dropped, rolled, came up behind the water trough. Another shot. This one punched into the trough, water spraying out in a thin stream. Evelyn, get down, he shouted. She was already flat on the porch, rifle up, scanning for targets. Another shot rang out, and she returned fire, the muzzle flash lighting up her face for a split second. Coulter heard a grunt from the darkness, then the sound of someone stumbling. "Got one?" she said. "How many are there?" "I don't know. At least 3. Coulter squinted into the night. The fire was spreading now, casting wild shadows across the yard. He saw movement near the chicken coop. 2 figures crouched low, moving toward the cabin. He fired twice, fast. One of the figures went down hard. The other dove behind the coop. "Coulter!" Evelyn's voice was tight. He turned. A rider was coming in from the east, fast, rifle raised. Coulter fired, but the horse veered and the shot went wide. The rider fired back, and the bullet tore through Coulter's sleeve, grazing his arm. He swore, dropped behind the trough again. The rider circled, came around for another pass. This time Evelyn fired first. The horse screamed, reared, and the rider tumbled backward into the dirt. The horse bolted, leaving the man scrambling to his feet. Coulter shot him before he could raise his gun again. The man dropped, didn't move. Silence. Coulter stayed low, breathing hard, listening. The fire roared. The wind carried the smell of burning wood and something worse. Burnt hair, burnt leather. He counted heartbeats. 10, 20, nothing. "You think that's all of them?" Evelyn asked. No. He was right. 3 more riders came in from the west, moving fast and low. They didn't bother with subtlety this time. They just opened fire, bullets slamming into the cabin walls, the porch, the doorframe. Evelyn threw herself inside, pulling Coulter with her. They slammed the door shut, crouched below the window. "They're not playing anymore," she said. "They never were." Outside, someone shouted orders. Coulter couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were regrouping, planning. "We can't stay here," Evelyn said. "If they surround us, we're done." Coulter nodded. "Back window. We go out, circle around, hit them from behind." "You sure?" "No, but it's better than sitting here waiting to die." They moved fast. Evelyn grabbed extra ammunition, shoved it into her pockets. Coulter checked his revolver, made sure every chamber was loaded. They went to the back window, eased it open. The night outside was dark, the fire casting long shadows that danced and twisted. Coulter went first. He dropped to the ground, rifle ready, scanning. Nothing. He waved Evelyn forward. She climbed out, landed beside him, quiet as a shadow. They moved along the back of the cabin, keeping low. The voices were clearer now, coming from the front. Coulter counted at least 4 men, maybe 5. They were arguing about something, whether to storm the cabin or burn it. One voice cut through the rest, cold, authoritative. "Burn it," the voice said. "We're done playing." Victor Harrow. Coulter felt something cold settle in his chest. He glanced at Evelyn. She met his eyes, nodded once. They moved forward, staying in the shadows, circling wide. When they reached the corner of the cabin, Coulter peered around. Harrow was standing near the remains of the barn, surrounded by 5 men on horseback. He looked calm, almost bored, like this was just another day's work. One of the riders had a torch in his hand, already lit. "Wait," Harrow said. "Give them one more chance. If they come out, we take them alive. If they don't, we burn them out." "And if they shoot at us?" one of the men asked. "Then shoot back." Harrow raised his voice. "Miss Mercer, Mr. Hayes, I know you're in there. Come out now, and no one else has to die tonight." Coulter stepped around the corner, rifle raised. "You first." Harrow turned, surprised for just a second before his expression smoothed into something unreadable. The men on horseback whipped around, hands going for their guns. "Don't!" Coulter said. His voice was flat, hard. "You draw, you die." The men froze. Harrow studied Coulter, then Evelyn, as she stepped into view beside him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Harrow said. "You burned her barn," Coulter said. "You tried to burn her house. You sent men to kill us. You don't get to talk about hard." Harrow sighed. "I gave you a choice. You chose poorly. No, you gave us a threat. We're choosing to fight." One of the riders shifted in his saddle, hand twitching toward his gun. Coulter's rifle swung toward him. "Do it, please." The man froze. Evelyn spoke, her voice steady. "You're going to leave now, all of you, and you're not coming back." Harrow smiled faintly. "Or what?" "Or I pull this trigger," Coulter said. And then she pulls hers, and we keep pulling until every one of you is dead. You can't kill all of us. Maybe not. But I can kill you, and I will. For the first time, something flickered in Harrow's eyes. Not fear exactly, but caution. He looked at Coulter like he was recalculating odds, reassessing risk. You're a gunslinger, Harrow said. I can see it. You've killed before. You'll kill again. He tilted his head. So why are you here? What's a man like you doing defending a worthless patch of desert? It's not worthless to her. Everything's worthless if you're dead. Then I guess we'll find out. Harrow stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to his men. We're leaving. One of the riders protested. But now, Harrow said sharply. We're leaving now. The men hesitated, then turned their horses. They rode off slowly, deliberately, not looking back. Harrow was the last to leave. He paused, looked at Evelyn. This isn't over, he said. I know, she replied. Harrow nodded once, then spurred his horse and disappeared into the darkness. Coulter didn't lower his rifle until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. When he finally did, his hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from rage, from the sheer effort of holding himself together when every instinct screamed to pull the trigger. Evelyn lowered her rifle too, let out a long, shaky breath. We just made an enemy. We already had one. A worse enemy. Coulter looked at the burning barn, the scattered bodies in the yard, the bullet holes in the cabin walls. Yeah, probably. They spent the rest of the night dragging the bodies away from the cabin and putting out what remained of the barn fire. By the time the sun came up, they were both exhausted, covered in soot and ash. The barn was gone. The horses were scattered. The cabin looked like it had been through a war, because it had. Evelyn sat on the porch steps, staring at the wreckage. Coulter sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Evelyn said, We can't do this alone. I know. If Harrow comes back with more men, if he brings an army, we're done. Coulter nodded. So we make sure we're not alone. She looked at him. How? We get everyone together, all the homesteaders, all the families who've been hit. We make this bigger than just you and me. You think they'll come? After what happened to Carson? After what just happened here? Coulter looked at her. Yeah, they'll come. 2 days later, they sent word to every homestead within 30 miles. The message was simple. Meet at Hewitt's Ranch at sundown. Come armed. Come ready. They came. By the time Coulter and Evelyn arrived, there were already a dozen families gathered. Men, women, even a few older children who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but understood why they had to be there. Hewitt stood at the center, his face still bruised, his son beside him. When everyone was assembled, Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't shout, didn't plead. She just spoke clearly, letting her voice carry across the group. You all know why we're here, she said. Blackstone Mining wants our land. They've burned us out, beaten us, threatened us, and they're not going to stop until we're all gone or dead. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, fear, anger, exhaustion. But here's the thing, Evelyn continued. We're still here, we're still standing, and as long as we stand together, they can't break us. A man near the back spoke up. They've got money, they've got guns, they've got the law on their side. What do we have? Each other, Evelyn said, and the will to fight. That's not enough, the man said. It has to be. Carson stepped forward, his face hard. My barn's gone. My wife's terrified. I've got nothing left to lose, so I'm with you. Ruth nodded. So am I. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Not all of them. A few families stayed silent, their fear too heavy to overcome. But most of them were ready. Coulter stepped forward. If we're going to do this, we do it smart. We don't wait for them to come to us one at a time. We set up defenses. We patrol in groups. We make sure no one's ever alone. And if they come in force, we meet them in force. You sound like a soldier, someone said. I'm not, Coulter replied. But I've fought enough to know how this works. You want to survive, you stay together. You watch each other's backs, and you don't give them an inch. Hewitt spoke up. What about the law? What about the marshal's office? Evelyn pulled out the documents Langley had given her. We've got proof. Proof that Blackstone's been bribing officials, threatening settlers, ordering violence. I sent copies to the territorial marshal in Prescott. If they act, it could shut Blackstone down. And if they don't? Evelyn's jaw tightened. Then we handle it ourselves. The group fell silent. Then Hewitt's son spoke, his voice young but steady. We've got nothing if we don't have our land. My pa taught me that. I say we fight. Hewitt put a hand on his son's shoulder, pride flickering across his face. Then we fight. They spent the rest of the evening planning. Who would patrol which areas? How to signal if trouble came? Where to gather if they needed to make a stand? It wasn't perfect. It wasn't military. But it was something. When the meeting ended, people dispersed slowly, talking in low voices, their faces grim but determined. Coulter and Evelyn stayed behind, helping Hewitt clean up. You think this will work? Hewitt asked. I think it's our only chance, Coulter said. Hewitt nodded. Then I hope you're right. Meatballs. The next week was tense. Patrols went out every day, watching the roads, the hills, the horizon. Blackstone's men were spotted a few times, always at a distance, always watching, but they didn't attack. Not yet. Coulter spent his days working on Evelyn's ranch, rebuilding what he could, preparing for what he knew was coming. Evelyn worked beside him, her determination unshaken despite everything. At night, they sat by the fire, exhausted but alive. One evening, as they sat in silence, Evelyn spoke. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Just riding off and never looking back? Coulter looked at her. Every day. Why don't you? He was quiet for a moment. Because leaving means they win, and I'm tired of watching bad men win. Evelyn studied him, something shifting in her expression. You've changed. Yeah? When you first got here, you were just a drifter, someone passing through, but now… She paused. Now you're something else. What's that? Someone who cares. Coulter didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything, but he reached over and took her hand, and she didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling between them, the desert stretching out dark and silent beyond the cabin walls. Then 10 days after the meeting, everything went to hell. It started at dawn. Coulter was out checking the fence line when he heard gunfire in the distance. Not a single shot, a volley. Then another, and another. He spurred his horse and rode hard toward the sound. When he crested the ridge, he saw it. Hewitt's ranch was under attack. There were at least a dozen riders surrounding the property, firing at the house, the barn, anything that moved. Hewitt and his son were returning fire from behind overturned wagons, but they were pinned down, outnumbered. Coulter could see other settlers arriving from the east, Carson, Ruth, a few others, but they were too far away to help. Coulter didn't hesitate. He rode straight into the fight, rifle up, firing as he went. He dropped one rider, then another. The attackers scattered, confused by the sudden assault from behind. It bought Hewitt enough time to reposition, to get his son inside the house. Coulter dismounted, took cover behind a water trough, kept firing. The attackers regrouped, turned their attention toward him. Bullets slammed into the trough, into the dirt around him. He fired back, calm and methodical, making every shot count. Then the other settlers arrived. Carson came in from the east, shotgun blazing. Ruth fired from horseback, deadly accurate. Others followed, spreading out, flanking the attackers. The tide turned fast. The Blackstone men realized they were surrounded, outgunned. They broke, riding off in a chaotic retreat. Coulter stood, watched them go. His heart was pounding, his hands steady. When the dust settled, he looked around. Hewitt was standing in the doorway of his house, bleeding from a shoulder wound, but alive. His son was beside him, pale but unharmed. You all right? Coulter called. Hewitt nodded. Thanks to you. Carson rode up, his face grim. They hit my place too. Burned the house this time. My wife got out, but we've got nothing left. Ruth dismounted, checked her rifle. They're not stopping. They're going after all of us. Coulter looked at the group. Then we go after them. What? Ruth said. We can't keep playing defense. They'll just keep coming, keep burning, keep killing until we're all gone. He met their eyes. We need to hit them where it hurts. How? Hewitt asked. We go to their camp, we find Harrow, and we make him understand that this ends now. Carson shook his head. That's suicide. Maybe, Coulter said, but it's better than waiting here to die. There was a long silence. Then Hewitt stepped forward. "I'm in." Ruth nodded. "So am I." One by one, the others agreed. Not all of them. Some were too scared, too exhausted. But enough. Enough to make a difference. Coulter looked at them, this ragged group of farmers and ranchers who'd been pushed too far, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They spent the next 2 days preparing, gathering weapons, scouting Blackstone's main camp, which was set up about 15 miles north near an old mining claim. It wasn't a fortress, but it was well guarded. At least 20 men, maybe more. Evelyn wanted to come. Coulter told her no. "I'm not sitting this out," she said. "Someone needs to stay here. Protect the others who aren't coming. Then send someone else." "I'm sending you." She glared at him. "You don't get to decide that." "Yes, I do. Because if this goes wrong, someone needs to be alive to tell the story, to finish the fight." He stepped closer. "That someone is you." Evelyn held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away, jaw tight. "I hate this. I know. If you die, I won't." "You don't know that." "No, but I'm going to try really hard not to." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she grabbed his shirt, pulled him close, and kissed him, hard, desperate. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "You come back," she said. "I will. Promise me." "I promise." He didn't know if he could keep that promise, but he said it anyway. They rode out at dusk. 12 men, all armed, all quiet. Coulter led them north, following the trail he and Hewitt had scouted 2 days earlier. The desert stretched out around them, empty and indifferent. The sky turned from blue to orange to purple as the sun sank behind the hills. When they reached the ridge overlooking Blackstone's camp, they stopped. Coulter dismounted, crawled to the edge, looked down. The camp was sprawled across a small valley. Tents, wagons, a central fire where men gathered, drinking and talking. Guards posted at the perimeter, rifles slung over their shoulders. And in the center of it all, standing near a large tent, was Victor Harrow. Coulter studied the layout, counted the guards, mapped out the approach. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was doable. He crawled back, gathered the others. "Here's the plan," he said quietly. "We split into 3 groups. Hewitt, you take 4 men and circle around to the west. Hit them from that side, make noise, draw their attention. Carson, you take 3 and come in from the east, pin them down. I'll take the rest straight through the middle. We're not here to kill everyone. We're here to get Harrow." "And if he doesn't come quietly?" Hewitt asked. "Then we make him." They moved into position. Coulter's group crept down the slope, staying low, using the rocks and scrub for cover. The guards were lazy, distracted. They didn't see the settlers coming until it was too late. Hewitt's group opened fire first. The camp erupted into chaos. Men scrambled for weapons, shouting, trying to figure out where the attack was coming from. Carson's group hit them from the other side, and the confusion deepened. Coulter charged straight through the center, firing as he went. 2 guards went down before they could raise their rifles. A third tried to stop him, and Coulter shot him in the leg, kept moving. The others followed, a ragged line of angry, desperate men who'd been pushed too far. Harrow was already moving, retreating toward the large tent. Coulter saw him, broke away from the group, sprinted after him. Harrow turned, drew a revolver, fired. The bullet went wide. Coulter didn't stop. He slammed into Harrow, drove him to the ground. Harrow struggled, but Coulter was stronger, faster. He pinned him, shoved the barrel of his revolver under Harrow's chin. "It's over," Coulter said. Harrow looked up at him, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes cold. "You think killing me changes anything? Blackstone's bigger than me. They'll send someone else. And someone after that. You can't win." "Maybe not," Coulter said, "but I can make damn sure you lose." He pulled Harrow to his feet, dragged him toward the center of the camp. The fighting was dying down. Most of Blackstone's men had fled or surrendered. A few lay wounded. Coulter shoved Harrow forward, made him stand where everyone could see. "Listen to me," Coulter shouted. "This man ordered you to burn homes, to threaten families, to kill people who were just trying to live their lives. He told you it was business. He told you it was progress. But it's not. It's greed. And it ends now." Harrow glared at him. "You're a fool." "Maybe. But I'm a fool who's still standing." Hewitt rode up, his face grim. "What do we do with him?" Coulter looked at Harrow, then at the others. "We take him to the territorial marshal. Let the law deal with him." "The law's bought," someone said. "Not all of it," Coulter replied. "We've got proof. We've got witnesses. And now we've got him." He looked at Harrow. "You're done." Harrow smiled faintly. "We'll see." They tied him up, loaded him onto a horse. As they prepared to leave, one of Hewitt's men approached Coulter. "There's something you should see," he said. Coulter followed him to the large tent. Inside there were maps, documents, ledgers, records of every bribe, every payment, every illegal deal Blackstone had made. More proof than they could have hoped for. Coulter gathered everything he could carry, stuffed it into a saddlebag. When he stepped outside, the camp was quiet. The settlers stood in a loose circle, exhausted, bloodied, but alive. "Let's go home," Coulter said. They rode through the night, Harrow bound and silent between them. By the time the sun rose, they were back at Hewitt's ranch. Evelyn was waiting. When she saw Coulter, relief flooded her face. She ran to him, and he dismounted, caught her, held her tight. "You came back," she said. "I promised." She pulled back, looked at Harrow. "Is it over?" "Almost." They sent Harrow and all the evidence to Prescott under armed escort. 3 days later, word came back. The territorial marshal had opened a full investigation. Blackstone Mining was under federal scrutiny. Victor Harrow was in custody, facing charges that would put him away for years. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't justice for everything Blackstone had done. But it was enough. The homesteaders celebrated that night, gathering at Hewitt's ranch, drinking whiskey, sharing stories. Coulter stood on the edge of the group, watching, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Evelyn found him there, handed him a cup. "You did it?" "We did it?" She smiled. "Yeah, we did." They stood in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the laughter drifting across the night. "So what now?" she asked. Coulter looked at her. "Now we rebuild." Rebuilding turned out to be harder than fighting. Coulter discovered that the morning he tried to lift a new barn beam into place, and his side screamed in protest, the old wound reminding him it wasn't as healed as he'd convinced himself. He dropped the beam, swore under his breath, and Evelyn looked over from where she was hammering fence posts. "You all right?" she called. "Fine." "You're a terrible liar." He picked up the beam again, slower this time, and wrestled it into position. By the time he got it secured, sweat was running down his back despite the cool November air. Evelyn walked over, handed him a canteen. "You don't have to do everything in one day," she said. "Barn's not going to build itself. It's also not going anywhere." She looked at him, her expression softer than usual. "You've done enough. Rest." "I'll rest when it's finished." She shook her head but didn't argue. That was one thing Coulter had learned about Evelyn over the past few months. She understood stubbornness because she lived it herself. They were alike that way, both too proud to quit even when quitting made sense. The barn went up piece by piece over the next 2 weeks. Hewitt came by with his son to help. Carson showed up one morning with lumber he'd salvaged from his own ruined property. Said he didn't need it anymore since he was rebuilding closer to town. Ruth brought food, more than 2 people could eat, and stayed to help hammer shingles onto the roof. It wasn't charity. It was repayment. Everyone who showed up owed Evelyn and Coulter their land, their livelihood, maybe their lives. They paid those debts in sweat and hours, and no one talked about it because talking would have made it awkward. By mid-November, the barn was standing again. It wasn't pretty. The wood was mismatched, the roof slightly crooked, but it was solid. Coulter stood back and looked at it, felt something close to pride. "Not bad," Evelyn said beside him. "Not great either." "It'll do." That became their phrase for everything. The fence they patched with spare wire and hope. The chicken coop they rebuilt from scrap. The corral gate that hung crooked but closed. It'll do. Because perfect wasn't the goal anymore. Surviving was. The nights were getting colder. Frost came every morning now, turning the desert silver before the sun burned it away. Coulter and Evelyn fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, work until dusk, collapse by the fire, do it again the next day. They didn't talk much during the work. Didn't need to. But at night, when the fire was low and exhaustion made them honest, they talked about things that mattered. You ever think about what you'd be doing if you hadn't gotten shot? Evelyn asked one evening. Coulter considered that. Probably drifting, looking for the next job, staying one step ahead of whoever wanted me dead. Sounds lonely. It was. She poked at the fire with a stick, sent sparks spiraling up into the dark. You miss it? No. Not even a little? He looked at her. No. She smiled faintly, didn't push further. They sat in silence for a while, the wind rattling the shutters, the fire crackling between them. What about you? Coulter asked. You ever think about leaving, selling this place, going somewhere easier? Every single day. That surprised him. Yeah? Yeah. Every time something breaks, every time I remember how much work is left, every time I think about doing this alone for the rest of my life. She looked at him. But then I remember why I stayed in the first place. Because it's mine, because I built it, because leaving would mean all of that was for nothing. It wouldn't be for nothing, wouldn't it? She set the stick down. I don't know. Maybe I'm just stubborn. You are. She laughed, a short, surprised sound. Thanks. But that's not a bad thing. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You planning to stay? Or are you just here until something better comes along? Coulter didn't answer right away. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. I don't know what's coming along, he said finally, but I know I don't want to leave. Why? Because this is the first place I've been that feels like it could be home. Evelyn's eyes softened. She reached over, took his hand, squeezed it once before letting go. Good, she said quietly, because I'd like you to stay. Word came from Prescott 3 weeks after Harrow's arrest. A federal investigator arrived in Red Bluff with a stack of documents and a lot of questions. He spent 2 days interviewing settlers, reviewing evidence, taking statements. When he left, he told them the case against Blackstone Mining was solid. Harrow was facing charges for bribery, conspiracy, and ordering acts of violence. The company itself was under investigation, its assets frozen. It's going to take time, the investigator said, but justice will be served. Coulter wasn't sure he believed that. He'd seen too many rich men walk away from worse, but he nodded, thanked the man, and watched him ride off. Evelyn stood beside him, arms crossed. You think they'll actually punish him? I think they'll try. That's not the same thing. No, but it's better than nothing. She sighed. I'll take it. The first snow came in early December, light and fleeting, melting before noon. But it was a reminder that winter was coming, and winter on the frontier didn't forgive mistakes. Coulter and Evelyn worked harder, stocking firewood, repairing the roof, making sure the livestock had shelter. The other homesteaders were doing the same, preparing for the long, cold months ahead. One afternoon, Hewitt rode over with news. Marshall's office sent word. Harrow's trial starts in January. They want us to testify. Evelyn looked up from the fence she was mending. All of us? Anyone who's willing. They want to make sure the jury hears what he did, what Blackstone did. Coulter leaned against the fence post. That's a long ride in the middle of winter. I know, but it might be the only way to make sure he doesn't walk. Evelyn glanced at Coulter, then back at Hewitt. We'll go. You sure? Yeah, we didn't fight this hard just to let him slip away. Hewitt nodded. I'll let the others know. After he left, Coulter looked at Evelyn. You really want to go all the way to Prescott in January? No, but I want to see him pay for what he did. What if the jury doesn't convict? Then at least we tried. Coulter couldn't argue with that, so he didn't. Christmas came quiet and cold. Evelyn didn't have much in the way of decorations, but she hung a string of dried berries across the window and made a meal that was better than anything Coulter had eaten in years. They sat at the small table, the fire warm behind them, and ate in comfortable silence. This is nice, Evelyn said eventually. Yeah, it is. I haven't had a Christmas like this in a long time, not since my brother was alive. Coulter set down his fork. You miss him? Every day. She looked at the fire. He was the one who wanted to come out here, said we could make something of ourselves if we were willing to work for it. I thought he was crazy. She smiled faintly. Turns out he was right. He'd be proud of you. She looked at him, eyes bright. You think? I know. They finished the meal, cleaned up together, and sat by the fire as the night deepened. Coulter thought about all the Christmases he'd spent alone, drifting from town to town, no one to share a meal with, no one who cared whether he lived or died. This was different. This was better. Coulter? Evelyn's voice was soft. Yeah? Thank you for staying, for fighting, for all of it. He looked at her, saw the gratitude and something else in her eyes, something that made his chest tighten. You don't have to thank me. I know, but I want to. He reached over, took her hand. She didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside, the world beyond the cabin walls feeling very far away. January brought snow that stayed. The desert turned white and silent, and the cold was sharp enough to cut. Coulter and Evelyn prepared for the trip to Prescott, packing supplies, making sure the ranch would survive a week without them. Ruth agreed to check on the livestock, and Hewitt said he'd keep an eye on the property. The morning they left, the sky was gray and heavy with the promise of more snow. They rode north with Carson and a few others who'd agreed to testify. The journey took 4 days, slow and brutal. The cold seeped through every layer of clothing, and the nights were miserable even with fires. But they pushed on. Prescott was bigger than Coulter expected, a sprawling town with actual streets and buildings that looked like they'd been there a while. The courthouse was a 2-story brick structure at the center of town, imposing and official. They arrived the day before the trial, checked into a boarding house, and tried to rest. Coulter couldn't sleep. He lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. He'd testified before, years ago, in a case that had gone badly for everyone involved. He didn't like courtrooms, didn't like lawyers, didn't like the way the truth got twisted until it didn't resemble anything real. Evelyn was in the room next to his. He could hear her moving around, restless. Eventually, he got up, walked to her door, knocked softly. "Come in," she said. He opened the door. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still dressed, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked up at him. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No." "You nervous?" "A little." She patted the bed beside her. He sat down, and they sat in silence for a while. "What if they don't believe us?" she asked quietly. "They'll believe us." "How do you know?" "Because we're telling the truth, and the truth has a way of coming through even when people don't want to hear it." She looked at him. "You really believe that?" "I have to." She leaned against him, rested her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her, held her close. They stayed like that until the gray light of dawn started creeping through the window. The trial began at 9 in the morning. The courtroom was packed. Settlers, townspeople, journalists who'd come from as far as Denver to cover the case. Victor Harrow sat at the defense table, flanked by 2 expensive-looking lawyers. He looked calm, composed, like this was just another business meeting. The prosecutor was a lean man named Whitaker, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. He laid out the case methodically, calling witness after witness. Hewitt testified first, describing the attack on his ranch, the beating his son had taken. Carson followed, talking about his burned barn and ruined house. Ruth spoke about the threats, the fear, the sense that no one was safe. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She walked to the stand, took the oath, sat down. Whitaker approached her gently, asked her to describe what had happened. She did, her voice steady, her words clear. She talked about Dalton's visits, Harrow's threats, the night the barn burned. She talked about the documents Langley had brought, the proof of Blackstone's corruption. Harrow's lawyer, a man named Crenshaw, cross-examined her aggressively. He tried to make her sound unreliable, emotional, biased. He suggested she'd fabricated evidence out of spite. Evelyn didn't flinch. She answered every question calmly, never raising her voice, never backing down. When she was finished, she stepped down and sat beside Coulter. He reached over, squeezed her hand. "You did good," he said quietly. "I hope so." Then it was Coulter's turn. He walked to the stand, took the oath, sat down. Whitaker asked him to describe his involvement. Coulter told the story simply. How he'd been wounded, how Evelyn had saved him, how he'd stayed to help her, how Blackstone's men had attacked, how the homesteaders had fought back. Crenshaw went after him hard. He dug into Coulter's past, brought up old warrants, old charges, tried to paint him as a violent drifter with no credibility. Coulter didn't deny it. He admitted what he'd been, what he'd done, but he also made it clear that what he was testifying to now was the truth. "You expect this jury to believe a known gunslinger over a respected businessman?" Crenshaw asked. Coulter looked at him, then at the jury. "I expect this jury to look at the evidence, to listen to the witnesses, and to decide whether a man who orders violence against families deserves to be called respected." Crenshaw's face tightened, but he didn't push further. The trial lasted 3 days. The defense tried to discredit the settlers, to suggest they were exaggerating, that Blackstone had acted within the law. But the evidence was overwhelming. The documents Langley had provided, the testimonies, the bodies. On the third day, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the courtroom was silent. "We find the defendant, Victor Harrow, guilty on all counts." The room erupted. Some people cheered, others wept. Harrow's face went pale, then hardened into something cold and bitter. The judge banged his gavel, called for order. Harrow was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Blackstone Mining was ordered to pay restitution to the affected settlers and was barred from operating in the territory. Coulter sat there, feeling something he couldn't quite name. Not relief, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense that, for once, the right thing had happened. Evelyn grabbed his hand, squeezed tight. "We won," she whispered. "Yeah," he said. "We did." They stayed in Prescott for 2 more days, making sure the legal paperwork was in order, that the restitution payments were set up properly. Then they rode home. The journey slower this time because the relief made them less urgent. When they finally arrived back at the ranch, everything was as they'd left it. The barn stood crooked but solid. The chickens clucked in their coop, the horses grazed in the corral. It looked like home. Evelyn dismounted, stood there for a moment just looking at it. Then she turned to Coulter. "It's really over," she said. "Yeah, it is." She walked over to him, put her arms around him, held him tight. He held her back, feeling the tension drain out of both of them. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we live," he said. "We build. We make this place into what it's supposed to be." She pulled back, looked up at him. "And what's that?" "Ours." She smiled, a real smile this time, bright and unguarded. "I like the sound of that." Spring came slowly, thawing the frozen ground, bringing green back to the desert. Coulter and Evelyn worked side by side, repairing, rebuilding, expanding. They bought more cattle with the restitution money, hired a hand to help with the heavy work. The ranch started to feel less like survival and more like a future. The other homesteaders thrived too. Carson rebuilt his house, bigger this time. Hewitt expanded his herd. Ruth started a small trading post that became a gathering place for settlers across the region. The community grew stronger, bound together by what they'd survived. One evening in late April, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Coulter and Evelyn sat on the porch. The day's work was done. The ranch was quiet, peaceful. "You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't found you that day?" Evelyn asked. Coulter thought about that. "I'd be dead." "Yeah, probably." She looked at him. "And I'd still be alone." "You were managing fine alone." "I was surviving. That's not the same thing." She reached over, took his hand. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I." They sat in silence, watching the light fade, the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Coulter thought about all the roads he'd traveled, all the places he'd drifted through, never staying long enough to care. He'd spent his whole life running from something he couldn't name. But he wasn't running anymore. He was home. "Evelyn," he said quietly. "Yeah? I want to ask you something." She looked at him, curiosity and something else in her eyes. "All right." He stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, looked out at the ranch they'd built together. Then he turned back to her. "I'm not good with words," he said, "and I'm not the kind of man anyone should build a life with. I've done things I'm not proud of. I've got a past that'll never go away." He paused. "But I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, and I can't imagine spending the rest of my life anywhere but here, with you." Evelyn stood up slowly, her eyes wide. "Coulter?" "I know I don't have much to offer, but I'm asking anyway." He took a breath. "Will you marry me?" For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and disbelief. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you stubborn, infuriating man. Yes." He pulled her close, kissed her, and for the first time in his life, Coulter Hayes felt like he'd done something right. The wedding was small, just the homesteaders who'd fought beside them, gathered on a warm Saturday in May. Hewitt's wife made a cake. Ruth brought flowers. Carson played a fiddle badly, but with enthusiasm. They stood under the cottonwood trees near the creek, and a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through spoke words about commitment and partnership and building a life together. Coulter barely heard any of it. He was too busy looking at Evelyn, who wore a simple dress and had flowers in her hair and looked more beautiful than anyone had a right to be. When the preacher asked if he took this woman, Coulter said, "I do," and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything. When Evelyn said the same, her voice steady and sure, Coulter felt something in his chest crack open, something he'd kept locked away for so long he'd forgotten it was there. They kissed and everyone cheered, and the rest of the day was a blur of food and laughter and dancing. Coulter wasn't a good dancer, but Evelyn didn't seem to care. They stumbled through a waltz while Carson's fiddle screeched, and when it was over, they were both laughing so hard they could barely stand. As the sun set and people started to leave, Hewitt pulled Coulter aside. "You're a lucky man," he said. "I know. You take care of her." "I will." Hewitt nodded, clapped him on the shoulder. "Good." When everyone was gone, Coulter and Evelyn stood alone in the fading light. The ranch stretched out around them, quiet and theirs. "So," Evelyn said, "what now?" Coulter smiled. "Now we start the rest of our lives." "That simple?" "That simple." She took his hand and they walked back to the cabin together, ready for whatever came next. The rest of their lives started the next morning with a leaking roof. Coulter woke to the sound of water dripping onto the floor near the fireplace. He opened his eyes, saw Evelyn already up, standing beneath the leak with a bucket, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Good morning, husband," she said dryly. He sat up, rubbed his face. "Good morning, wife." "We've got a problem." "I can see that." "You going to fix it?" "Yeah, after coffee." She laughed, shook her head. Welcome to marriage." He got up, pulled on his boots, and climbed onto the roof with a handful of tar and some spare shingles. The leak was small but persistent, and it took him most of the morning to patch it properly. When he climbed back down, Evelyn was waiting with bread and cheese and a look that said she was trying not to laugh. "What?" he asked. "You've got tar in your hair." He reached up, felt the sticky mess. "Great. Come here." She pulled him over to the water barrel, dunked a rag, and started scrubbing at his hair. It hurt, but Coulter didn't complain. He just stood there, letting her work, feeling oddly content despite the discomfort. "You know," she said as she scrubbed, "most men spend the day after their wedding doing something romantic." "I fixed a roof." "Very romantic." "I thought so." She finished cleaning his hair, stepped back, looked at him. "You're impossible." "You married me anyway." "I did." She kissed him, quick and light. "And I don't regret it." "Good, because you're stuck with me now." "I know." They worked through the day side by side, the rhythm between them easy and familiar. That became their pattern over the weeks that followed. Wake up, fix whatever had broken overnight, work until dusk, collapse into bed exhausted. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. By June, the ranch was thriving in a way Evelyn had never managed alone. The cattle herd had grown to 40 head. The chickens were laying consistently. The vegetable garden behind the cabin was producing more than they could eat. Coulter built a second corral for the horses, and Evelyn started training a young mare she'd bought from a trader passing through. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Evelyn spoke quietly. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "Have what?" "A partner. Someone to share the work with, someone who stays." She looked at him. "I spent so long doing everything alone, I forgot what it felt like to not be alone." Coulter reached over, took her hand. "You're not alone anymore." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "And I'm grateful for that, every day." They sat in silence for a while, the desert stretching out before them in shades of orange and purple. Coulter thought about the man he'd been when he first stumbled onto this land, half dead, running from a past that wouldn't let him go, expecting nothing but more violence and more drifting. That man felt like a stranger now. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Saving me?" Evelyn looked at him, surprised. "No. Why would I?" "Because you could have left me there. Could have kept your life simple. My life was never simple." She smiled faintly. "And saving you was the best decision I ever made." "Even with all the trouble it brought?" "Especially because of the trouble it brought." She turned to face him fully. "You think I would have survived Blackstone alone? You think I would have had the courage to fight back without you standing beside me? You would have found a way." "Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed. Hope. The belief that things could actually get better." Coulter didn't know what to say to that, so he just held her, and they watched the sun disappear behind the hills. Summer turned the desert into an oven. The heat was relentless, sapping energy, making every task twice as hard. Coulter and Evelyn adjusted their schedule, working early mornings and late evenings, resting during the worst of the midday sun. The cattle moved to the southern pasture where there was more shade. The chickens barely laid eggs. Even the horses looked miserable. One afternoon in late July, Hewitt rode over with news. Word from Prescott: Blackstone Mining's officially dissolved. Assets sold off. The company doesn't exist anymore. Evelyn looked up from the garden she was watering. "That's good, right?" "It's over," Hewitt said. "Really over. They can't come back." Coulter leaned against the fence. "What about the other companies? Anyone else trying to buy up land?" "Not that I've heard. I think we scared them off." Hewitt grinned. "Turns out homesteaders who fight back aren't worth the trouble." "Good." After Hewitt left, Evelyn sat down on the porch steps, looking thoughtful. Coulter sat beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That it's strange. We spent so long fighting, so long afraid, and now it's just done. And we're still here." "You sound surprised." "I am, a little." She looked at him. "I didn't think we'd win. But we did." "Yeah, we did." She was quiet for a moment. "So what do we do now?" "We live," Coulter said. "We build. We make this place into something that lasts." She smiled. "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." By August, the heat broke slightly, and the work became easier. Coulter built a new storage shed for tools and supplies. Evelyn traded some cattle for materials to expand the house. An extra room, a proper kitchen, a porch that wrapped around the front and side. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but they tackled it together. Carson came by one day with his oldest son, a boy of 15 who was strong and eager to learn. "Figured you could use help with the construction," Carson said. "Boy needs to learn how to build anyway." The four of them worked together over the next month, raising walls, fitting beams, hammering shingles. It was exhausting but satisfying, and by September the addition was finished. It wasn't perfect. One wall was slightly crooked and the porch sagged a little on the west side, but it was solid. It was real. Evelyn stood in the new kitchen, looking around, her eyes bright. "I can't believe we did this." "Believe it," Coulter said. She turned to him, threw her arms around his neck, kissed him hard. "Thank you." "For what?" "For everything. For staying, for fighting, for building this with me." He held her close. "I didn't do it alone." "Neither did I." That night they cooked their first meal in the new kitchen. It was just stew, nothing fancy, but they ate at the table Coulter had built from scrap lumber, and it felt like a celebration. After they finished, Evelyn washed the dishes while Coulter swept the floor, and the domesticity of it all should have felt strange, but didn't. It felt right. October brought cooler weather and a visit from the territorial surveyor, a thin man with spectacles who spent 2 days walking the property lines, taking measurements, updating maps. When he finished, he presented Evelyn with an official deed, stamped and signed. "This land is legally yours," he said. "No disputes, no claims against it. It's registered in your name." Evelyn took the deed with shaking hands. She stared at it for a long time, then looked at Coulter, tears streaming down her face. "It's really ours," she whispered. "Yeah," Coulter said. "It is." After the surveyor left, Evelyn framed the deed and hung it above the fireplace. Every time Coulter looked at it, he felt something warm settle in his chest. This wasn't just land anymore. It was proof. Proof that they'd fought and won. Proof that they belonged here. The homesteader community grew stronger over the fall. More families moved into the region, drawn by stories of fertile land and a group of settlers who'd stood up to a mining empire and lived to tell about it. Ruth's trading post expanded into a general store. Hewitt started a cattle association to help ranchers negotiate better prices. Carson ran for town council and won. Coulter found himself pulled into the community in ways he had never expected. People asked his advice on building projects, on handling disputes, on dealing with drifters who wandered through looking for trouble. He wasn't a leader. He'd never been a leader, but he was respected, and that was something he'd never had before. One evening, as he and Evelyn sat by the fire, she asked, "Do you miss it? The drifting? The freedom?" Coulter thought about that. "Sometimes, but not the way you'd think." "What do you mean?" "I miss the simplicity. No ties, no responsibilities. Just move on when things got hard." He looked at her. "But that wasn't freedom. That was running. And I'm tired of running." "What would you call this then?" "Home. The real kind. The kind you fight for." She smiled. "I like that." November came cold and clear. Coulter woke one morning to find Evelyn standing in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the frost-covered desert. "You all right?" he asked. She turned and he saw something in her face. Nervousness, excitement, fear, joy, all tangled together. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right." She walked over, sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm pregnant." Coulter stared at her. "You're pregnant, yes." For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't think, just stared at her, trying to process the words. "You're sure?" he finally managed. "I'm sure." "How long?" 2 months, I think, maybe 3. He stood up, started pacing. I don't know. We need to do something. Get a doctor. Build a crib. Make sure." She stood up, grabbed his arm, stopped him. "Coulter, breathe." He breathed, or tried to. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Or are you terrified?" "Both." She laughed, pulled him close. "Good. So am I." He held her, feeling the weight of what this meant. A child. A future that extended beyond just the two of them. Responsibility that went deeper than anything he'd ever known. "I don't know how to be a father," he said. "And I don't know how to be a mother. We'll figure it out together." "What if I'm not good at it?" "Then you'll get better." She pulled back, looked at him. "You're not the man you used to be, Coulter. You're better, stronger, kinder, and that's the man our child will know." He wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe he could be the kind of father a child deserved. But doubt gnawed at him, old and familiar. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into preparation. He built a cradle from oak, sanded it smooth, carved small patterns into the sides. He reinforced the cabin walls, made sure there were no drafts. He stocked extra firewood, extra supplies, extra everything. Evelyn watched him work with a mixture of amusement and affection. "You're going to exhaust yourself," she said one evening. "I'm fine." "You're not. You barely sleep." He set down the hammer he'd been holding. "I just want to make sure everything's ready." "It will be. We have time." "What if something goes wrong?" She walked over, put her hands on his face. "Then we'll deal with it. Together. Like we've dealt with everything else." He closed his eyes, leaned into her touch. "I'm scared." "I know. So am I." She kissed him gently. "But we're going to be all right. All 3 of us." Winter came hard that year. Snow fell heavy and stayed, blanketing the desert in white. The ranch work slowed to a crawl. Coulter and Evelyn spent most of their time inside, keeping the fire going, staying warm. Evelyn's belly grew, and with it came aches and exhaustion that worried Coulter more than he wanted to admit. Ruth visited every few weeks, bringing supplies and advice. She'd had 3 children of her own, and her practical wisdom helped ease some of Coulter's fears. "She'll be fine," Ruth said one afternoon as Evelyn napped. "She's strong, stubborn. She'll get through this." "And if she doesn't?" Ruth gave him a long look. "You can't think like that. You'll drive yourself crazy." "I'm already halfway there," she smiled. "Then stop. Be present. Be supportive. And trust that she knows her own body." Coulter tried. He really did. But every time Evelyn winced or held her back or looked pale, he felt panic rising. Christmas came quiet. They didn't have much energy for celebration, but they made a small meal and sat by the fire, Evelyn's hand resting on her belly. "You think it's a boy or a girl?" she asked. "I don't know. Does it matter?" "Not really. I'm just curious." "What do you want?" She thought about that. "A healthy baby. That's all I want." "Me too." She looked at him. "You're going to be a good father." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because you care. Because you're here. Because you're trying." She squeezed his hand. "That's more than a lot of children get." Coulter thought about his own father, a man he barely remembered, who disappeared when Coulter was 6 and never came back. He thought about all the years he'd spent alone, convinced he didn't need anyone, convinced that attachment was weakness. "I don't want to be like him," he said quietly. "Like who?" "My father." He left, just walked away like we didn't matter. Evelyn's expression softened. "You won't be like him. You're not capable of it." "How do you know?" "Because you stayed. When you could have left, when you should have left, you stayed. That's who you are now." He looked at her, saw the certainty in her eyes, and felt some of the fear ease. March brought the first signs of spring and the first signs that the baby was coming soon. Evelyn moved slower, tired more easily, but her determination never wavered. Coulter hovered, anxious and protective, until she finally snapped at him. "If you ask me one more time if I'm all right, I'm going to hit you with a frying pan." "I'm just worried." "I know, but I'm fine. The baby's fine. Now go fix something and leave me alone." He went outside, found things to fix that didn't need fixing, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The baby came on a warm April evening, just as the sun was setting. Coulter rode hard to get Ruth, who arrived with practiced efficiency. She sent Coulter outside, told him to stay there until she called for him. He paced in the yard, listening to the sounds from inside. Evelyn's breathing, Ruth's calm instructions, other sounds he didn't want to identify. Hours passed. The sun disappeared. Stars came out. And still he waited. Then he heard it. A cry. High and thin and unmistakably alive. Ruth appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Come meet your daughter." Coulter's legs almost didn't carry him. He stumbled inside, and there was Evelyn, exhausted and pale but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in cloth. "Coulter," she said softly. "Come here." He walked over slowly, looked down at the small face peeking out from the blanket. Dark hair, eyes squeezed shut, tiny fists waving. "She's perfect," Evelyn whispered. Coulter couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, just stared at this impossibly small person who was half him, half Evelyn, and entirely terrifying. "Do you want to hold her?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know how." "Neither do I, but we'll learn." She handed the baby to him, and Coulter held her carefully, like she might break. The baby squirmed, made a small sound, then settled against his chest. And in that moment, something in Coulter broke open completely. All the walls he'd built, all the distance he'd maintained, all the protection he'd wrapped around his heart, gone. "What should we name her?" Evelyn asked. Coulter looked at Evelyn, then back at the baby. "What about Grace?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Grace, I like that." "Grace Hayes," Coulter said quietly, testing the name. It felt right. Ruth left after making sure both mother and baby were stable. Coulter stayed up all night watching them sleep, afraid to close his eyes in case something went wrong. But nothing did. They just slept, peaceful and safe. The next morning, Hewitt came by to congratulate them. Then Carson. Then Ruth's husband with a basket of food. News spread through the homesteader community, and over the next week people stopped by with gifts, blankets, clothes, advice, stories. Coulter was overwhelmed by it all, by the kindness, by the sense that they were part of something bigger than just themselves. One evening, as he held Grace while Evelyn rested, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. The violence, the loneliness, the years of drifting from place to place, never belonging anywhere. And now this, a wife, a daughter, a home. "What are you thinking about?" Evelyn asked from the bed. He looked over at her. "About how different my life is now." "Different good or different bad?" "Different good." He looked down at Grace, who was sleeping in his arms. I never thought I'd have this. Any of this. Neither did I. You glad we do? She smiled. More than I can say. Spring turned into summer. Grace grew, her tiny features becoming more defined, her personality beginning to emerge. She cried a lot, more than Coulter expected. But she also had moments of quiet alertness where she'd stare at him like she was trying to figure him out. She's judging you, Evelyn said one afternoon, watching them. She's a baby. She doesn't judge. She's my daughter. She definitely judges. Coulter laughed, kissed Grace's forehead. You judging me, little one? Grace grabbed his finger, held tight. I think that's approval, Evelyn said. I'll take it. The ranch work continued, though slower now with a baby to care for. They took turns, one working, one watching Grace. It was exhausting, but manageable. And on the days when it felt like too much, someone from the community would show up to help. Ruth came by to watch Grace so Evelyn could rest. Carson brought supplies so Coulter didn't have to ride into town. Hewitt helped with the cattle. It wasn't charity, it was community. And that made all the difference. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch with Grace sleeping between them, Evelyn spoke quietly. Do you ever think about the man you used to be? Coulter considered that. Sometimes. Do you miss him? No. That man was lost. He didn't know where he belonged or what he wanted. He just kept moving because stopping hurt too much. And now I know where I belong. He looked at her. Here. With you. With Grace. Building a life that means something. Evelyn reached over, took his hand. You know what I've learned? What? That the best things in life aren't the ones that come easy. They're the ones you fight for, the ones you bleed for, the ones that cost you everything and give you back even more. She squeezed his hand. This life we've built, it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Coulter thought about that. About the gunshot wound that had nearly killed him. About the attacks, the fear, the violence. About the trial, the rebuilding, the endless work. She was right. None of it had been easy, but it had been worth it. I love you, he said. She smiled. I know. I love you too. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the desert they'd fought so hard to keep. Grace stirred between them, made a small sound, then settled back into sleep. And Coulter realized something he'd never understood before. Happiness wasn't about having a perfect life. It was about having a life worth fighting for. It was about finding people who mattered more than your own safety. It was about putting down roots even when every instinct said to run. It was about choosing to stay. He'd spent his whole life as a drifter, a gunslinger, a man with no ties and no future. But that man was gone. In his place was someone different, someone better, a husband, a father, a protector, someone who'd finally found home. The months passed. Grace grew stronger, started smiling, started reaching for things. The ranch prospered, the community thrived, and every day Coulter woke up grateful for the life he'd been given. One afternoon in late September, almost 2 years after he'd first stumbled onto this land bleeding and half dead, Coulter stood on the ridge overlooking the ranch. He could see the cabin below, the barn, the corrals, the fields. He could see Evelyn hanging laundry while Grace played in the dirt nearby. He thought about how much had changed, how much he'd changed. And he thought about the lesson in all of it, the truth he'd learned the hard way, that violence might win battles, but it doesn't build futures, that the hardest fights aren't the ones you wage with guns, but the ones you wage with yourself. Choosing to stay when running is easier, choosing to trust when fear says not to, choosing to build when destruction feels safer. That real strength isn't about how many men you can kill. It's about how many people you can protect, how many lives you can make better, how many futures you can help create. He'd been a weapon for most of his life. Now he was a builder, and that was a victory worth more than any gunfight he'd ever won. He walked back down to the cabin. Evelyn looked up as he approached, smiled. "Where'd you go?" she asked. "Just checking the fences." "They all right?" "They're fine." He sat down beside her, pulled Grace into his lap. She grabbed his nose, giggled. He laughed. "Everything's fine." And it was. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. Solid. Theirs. Evelyn leaned against him, and they sat there together, watching the desert turn gold in the afternoon sun. Grace babbled happily, and somewhere in the distance the cattle lowed, and the wind carried the smell of sage and dust and home. Coulter closed his eyes, breathed it in, and felt something he'd never felt before. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. Not the end of struggle, but the reward for enduring it. He'd been shot, saved, tested, and transformed. He'd fought for land that wasn't his, for people he barely knew, for a future he'd never imagined. And he'd won. Not because he was the fastest draw or the deadliest shot, but because he'd chosen something bigger than himself. Because he'd learned that the truest measure of a man isn't how hard he can fight, but what he's willing to fight for. Family. Home. The belief that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. Those were the things worth bleeding for. Those were the things that made a life. Coulter Hayes had spent 30 years running from his past. But here, on this patch of desert that he and Evelyn had defended with everything they had, he'd finally found his future. And he was never letting it go. Coulter? Evelyn's voice pulled him back. Yeah? You all right? You look like you're thinking hard about something. He smiled, kissed her forehead. Just thinking about how lucky I am. We both are. Yeah, he said, looking out at the ranch they'd built, the life they'd created, the daughter they'd brought into the world. Yeah, we are. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Grace fell asleep in his arms. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, and Coulter sat there, holding everything that mattered, grateful for the second chance he'd never thought he deserved. The desert had almost killed him once. Instead, it had given him a reason to live. And that, he thought, was the greatest victory of all.